Welcome to the show, Dr. Farkas.
Thank you so much, Dr. Collins. It's a pleasure to be here.
It always reminded me of some of those, I think it was either Three Stooges or one of those cartoons, one of those comics, comedic shows where they go, doctor, 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 doctor. One of those things.
Right.
But anyway,
I think it was.
the Three Stooges. I hate to admit those.
Let's not date ourselves.
That's right. So let's start off with Putin. And I know we were going to talk a little bit about Russia's involvement in the Middle East and everything else, but I'll let you take it away.
Well, I think on Putin, obviously part of his whole shtick, if you will, is to look tough. He's got to show that he's tough, he's youthful, he's got the Russian people behind him, and he's got to keep the Russian people behind him, which is getting difficult for him increasingly because obviously the economic situation is not very good. And the bargain that he made with the Russian people back in 2000 when he came into office was that he was going to improve their living conditions. And in exchange, they would let him be the tough guy and let him take increasing control over society and the political space. It's not working so well, so we've seen a change now in his approach. But it's still tough.
He is still tough. It's fascinating to me because I've been watching these oil prices and I'm thinking, that's really has to hurt the Russian economy. I mean, you're down to $30 a barrel or underneath that today. That's devastating for him. Are you aware of anything at all in regards to the Russian economy and how that's impacting Putin's behavior? Is he becoming more outlandish because of that?
I think that most of the analysis points to him actually becoming more nationalistic and more engaged externally because of what happened economically. So I think you're actually making an excellent point, Dr. Collins, because the economic situation, the writing was on the wall already, even before this latest invasion into Ukraine in 2014. The Russian economy is mostly affected, as you mentioned, by the price of oil. The price of oil had been coming down already. The Russian budget was basically organized around a reality of an oil price of about $100 a barrel. And when it started going down, that's when I think he realized that he was going to have to kind of switch horses or at least hedge his bets and get the Russian people behind him based on something else besides the economic deal, which is this nationalism that he's espousing and that he's really kind of showing us now full force. And so the price of oil definitely is having an impact on their foreign policy and certainly on the domestic side of the equation.
That's an excellent point. There's nothing like diverting the crowd by focusing on nationalism. So that's absolutely psychologically pretty smart. So what's...
sorry, go
ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, he's always had the same objectives all along. It's just how he goes about it now that's important. Because his number one objective has always been to make sure that he stays in power so that his autocratic political system remains in power so that he can continue to exercise control, kind of mafia-style control over the Russian economy. And then stemming from that, he also wants to show that Russia's a major power so that on par with the United States and the other Western major countries. And then he's got a lot of sort of other objectives which are maybe not as important as the first two, but he certainly wants to control his geographic periphery, which is Eastern Europe and Central Asia. And then the most troubling one, I think, for the international system clearly is that he wants to rewrite the rules of the international system, which is that he wants to make sure that there's no intervention in states to protect in states where the leader has been basically abusing its citizens. So a country like Syria, for example, he wants to make sure that the international community can't intervene. Whereas, of course, what we, the United States, the international community, the rules of the road in the UN allow for intervention in the case of a threat to international peace and stability that stems from an abusive, despotic dictator in a country.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. It's fascinating. It's a very fascinating situation over there. We brought up Syria. We brought up with Russia right now interfering in that war. And I don't know if it's interfering or realizing we really didn't get involved very heavily over there and they decided to take over. Which one do you think is more accurate?
Well, I think the Russians are interfering in order to try to help Assad. The moment they chose to interfere militarily is important. Assad was not doing well on the battlefield. And so Russia realized, the Kremlin realized that if Assad was going to have any chance sure that Assad could control at least that territory that he still had at that moment in control. And of course, the Russians have tried to expand the territory outward.
And is it a big issue? I mean, a lot of the media, I'm trying to always weed out the agendas behind the media's representations of things, but it seems like Russia's obviously bombing a lot of the rebels that supposedly we're trying to back, as well as ISIL, especially after the plane in Egypt. But is it fair to say that that's causing us problems here by him attacking the rebels? Or is Trump right that we don't even know who these rebels are to begin with? I'm not sure.
Okay, I don't want to bring Trump into this, or you can, of course, you're the host. But what I think is, it's obvious. I mean, we've heard from all of our experts, people who military experts who see what Russia's targeting. The Russians have been targeting the opposition, to include the moderate opposition that we support. So that's absolutely a problem for us. And aside from that, they said that they were going to target ISIS, and they haven't been targeting ISIS. Maybe I think their case can be made that they have targeted them to some extent, but certainly not to the extent that they have said that they would, and to the extent that we would like them to. So, our president has said, look, if Russia wants to join us, we can do a campaign together, or at least coordinated in some fashion, if Russia demonstrates that really their real target is ISIS. But we haven't seen that, and the proof really is in the bomb damage assessment, if you will.
That's a good point. Let me ask you this question. Is it possible, I'm not here to defend Putin whatsoever, but I'm just trying to think ahead here. Is Putin, let's say he bombs the rebels. He gets them out of the way. Assad now has better control. Do you think if Assad still needs help with ISIL, do you think he will go after them as well at that point? Or does he back off?
I mean, possibly, sure. I mean, I think it is possible because Russia does actually see a genuine threat posed to Russia and its interests by ISIL. Don't forget there are a lot of Russian Federation citizens fighting who have left primarily from the Caucasus area, so from the southern district, if you will, southern parts of Russia, and have gone over to fight with, in Syria with ISIS, and so that's obviously a potential threat for Russia should those folks decide to go back to Russia and take the fight to the Russian authorities. And there is, of course, an ongoing nascent, terrorist activity, some low-level terrorist activity in Russia today, in the Caucasus anyway. So I don't think that the Russians are making it up when they say they're concerned about ISIS, but it doesn't appear to be their primary concern. Their primary concern is propping up Assad.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I'm not advocating for him, but it just seems that if he really wants Assad there, he's pretty much going to fight anybody who gets in his way or who threatens Assad's regime, I'm assuming.
Yeah. Now, I mean, there might be some flexibility. We've heard Foreign Minister Lavrov say, well, we're not wedded to Assad himself. And even today, there were quotes of Putin, in one of his recent interviews where he said, well, if Assad decides he wants to go, of course he's welcome in Russia. We took Snowden in, we can take Assad in, leaving out, of course, they also took Yanukovych from Ukraine. And so, the Russians do give us these little hints that they might be willing to participate in a deal whereby Assad would have to go. But we really haven't seen a cold, hard plan as far as I can tell. I think that's probably what Secretary Kerry is trying to get out of the Russians, some kind of no-kidding, tangible plan with deadlines and real evidence that the Russians are willing to let Assad be removed from the picture.
I'm sure Assad feels really reassured about all this.
Well, he shouldn't feel reassured by anything because his actions are pretty despicable. So he has forfeited his right to rule Syria as far as most are concerned.
Yeah, I was being sarcastic. It doesn't seem like they're really doing that much to protect him, I guess, only to a certain degree. If it involves too much for the Russians, they may just go ahead and, why don't you come over here and live in Russia for a while?
So that's an interesting question, Carlos, or Dr. Carlos, because there is a question of how far will Russia go, how long will Russia engage militarily, will they up the ante? I mean, I do think that that's important because the Russian intervention came so that Russia could influence the diplomatic dialogue and achieve an objective at the negotiating table. They haven't achieved that objective. So now the question is, does Putin think he needs more leverage, and does he aim to achieve the leverage his usual way, using military force? If the answer to that is yes, then we may see them do more in Syria militarily. So I think that it will be interesting to see what's the next Russian move, because they're not getting what they want out of us yet.
I'm assuming you got to have the Mujahideen situation in Afghanistan looming in the back of their heads, too. They don't want to drag this thing on for too long.
Well, the Russians are very interesting because they do have sort of a 360 perspective, and I'm always watching, while we're paying attention and our media is focused on Russia, Syria, I'm always watching the whole sort of perspective and the whole landscape that the Russians are watching. So what are they doing in Ukraine? Well, there's been an increase in again, low level, but there's been an increase in fighting. Afghanistan, they started talking about Afghanistan over the last several months, which always makes me wary because when they start talking, there's always a possibility that they might do something. And what Putin loves to do, because this guy's a judo player, and we can talk about the poker player aspect of him later, but as a judo player, make a move to kind of get his opponents off balance. And so, to the extent that he considers us as opponents, which he does in certain circumstances, certainly, he will make a move somewhere that we're not expecting.
That's a fascinating analogy.
Afghanistan is not completely crazy.
You mean him going into Afghanistan?
You never know.
We're getting quite the insight on Putin and Russia. So we're going to wrap up here with Putin and Russia. We're going to find out what's going on with Russia and Iran. Is there something, how would you say, malevolent going on in the background?
Well, I don't, malevolent is a little bit of a strong, loaded word, but I would say Russia and Iran have a relationship going back decades, and I think that for Russia and Iran right now, they have sort of a intersection in terms of interest. They have these ongoing nuclear cooperation, which, as far as I'm concerned, is really about business and making money, but it's also, to some extent, maintaining Russian influence over Iran. But aside from that, now the Syria issue is really an area where they have an overlapping interest. But I would say that it's a relationship of convenience. I don't really see the relationship between Russia and Iran as being one that's a very deep one, if you will. So I think it'll be interesting to see as things unfold in Syria whether they stay on the same page with regard to Assad and the future of Syria.
I want to see what your opinion is on this. I asked yesterday a former CIA operative. I know, I hate to do that. Oh, now he's comparing me to the former CIA guy. But I asked him the relationship between Iran and Saudi. Is that going to be causing a lot of instability and problems in the Middle East?
Well, it is. It clearly is. I mean, a lot of what's going on is, obviously there's an underlying religious aspect to this, but in as much as, Saudi Arabia holds the Sunni standard, the flag, if you will, for Sunnis, although you can debate that because, when we talk about Southeast Asia and other parts of the world, it's not as clear, but certainly Iran, of course, waves the Shia flag, and so that means that in as much as you have Sunnis and Shias fighting over religious ideology, there's a role for those countries, but then their own geopolitical rivalry, you could flip the argument and say that's actually what's fueling what's going on. So it's complicated, and those two countries, they're very poor relationship and deteriorating recently, of course, with the killing by firing squad of a prominent Shia leader by the Saudi government did just added fuel to that fire and caused the relationship to deteriorate, which of course had ramifications across the Middle East and for those of us who are trying to do something about the Syria conflict.
Yeah, it really did seem to cause a lot of stir, obviously. You did a great job. Dr. Farkas is a professional here because she segued us right into Asia, which is beautiful. I know I wanted to talk a little bit about Indonesia and the Muslim community there. Because some people have asked me, well, what can we do about this, Dr. Carlos? And obviously that's very complex, like you were saying. It's very difficult to try to find a strategy to beat ISIL, to settle down the Middle East. But it seems like Indonesia is doing some things to counter terrorism.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key is really governance. You know, we're having a problem in Syria because, of course, governance has completely collapsed, and in Iraq too, there's a very weak governance there. So the Middle East is just a different situation because of the governance problem. What happened in Indonesia was after the Bali bombings, which were conducted by affiliates of Al-Qaeda, the Indonesian government woke up and they actually started taking terrorism really seriously. And I think if you look at what makes a successful campaign against terrorism, you have to have about 5 components. So you have to have good intelligence, you have to have good law enforcement, because the intelligence and the law enforcement make sure that you can defeat, sort of, if you will, with law enforcement, with police tactics, the terrorists. Then you have to have a really good de-radicalization or counter-radicalization program. So that's dealing with the terrorists that you put in prison, but also the population at large that could become terrorists. And then related to that is having good community relations, so you're kind of making sure that there's no sanctuary for the terrorists in your community. And then finally, related to the community is sort of the conditions in the society. So, and this is where I think in Indonesia they were really successful, because they not only worked on intelligence and law enforcement, which you can argue that the Iraqis are doing as well, and de-radicalization, which the Saudis are actually doing in their prisons as well. But in Indonesia, they did a really good job at counter-radicalization, so getting the message out to their people that any imams who are talking to you about, you know, beheading Christians, etc., those people are wrong. That's not what the Quran says you should do. And then number 2, this really dealing with making their society work for the majority of the people, so that there isn't a fertile landscape for terrorists to draw recruits from. So Indonesia still has a weak economy, but they worked to strengthen their economy. They worked to strengthen their rule of law, especially, of course, when it came to prosecuting terrorists. They did a lot of things right. And of course, they have a more tolerant society as far as Islam is concerned, and they're secular. Strictly speaking, Indonesia is a secular state.
That's fascinating, because you did cover a lot of areas very quickly. Isn't she amazing? Really quickly there.
Sorry, you had a bunch of facts at you.
I know. I was like, no, I gotta remember everything you just said. But one of the fascinating things, you were right on the target, is the aspect that Indonesia is doing a lot of education, and they're countering the radicals' message, which a lot of other countries are not doing. And it's fascinating. Do you think other countries in the Middle East, maybe more secular ones like a Turkey or something like that, would actually start adopting these kind of methodologies?
I think that they would be well advised to do that, because you can't just, I mean, you have to have a multifaceted approach. And I didn't mention the military, and actually I think that's part of why in Indonesia they've been really successful, because they focused on law enforcement, police, community. And if you look at developing democracies, I mean, let's leave ours aside. Let's just pick the UK, where they had to fight not only the Irish terrorists, but of course more recently Islamic terrorists. There they've worked also the same way, using intelligence, using law enforcement, really good police work, working with community leaders, especially, you know, Muslim leaders in the more recent terrorism that they've had to fight. The Indonesians did the same thing, and I think that's critical, because you can't just bomb your way, you know, or even arrest your way to eliminating terrorism.
That's absolutely true. It's a great point. And I want to also give credit. There were some Muslims, I think, from I think some Middle Eastern countries. I can't remember exactly from where they were. There was news reports of them trolling ISIL videos. So, you know, they are doing their part, slowly but surely there, definitely. That was interesting to see. And I think Indonesia is doing a great job, notwithstanding still some humanitarian violations, but they are doing a great job in counterterrorism. Do you think this is something some of the military here in America and other westernized countries are looking at to maybe help adopt in other Middle Eastern countries?
I mean, I think what would be wise is if we look at what we did to help Indonesia. So, first of all, we helped them. They set up a task force, a terrorism and transnational crime task force with our help in 2006. And actually, I was in Indonesia in 2005 when we were in the process of setting this up. successful in helping them with intelligence, working with us, and using, of course, foreign intelligence as well. And then they also establish a dedicated counterterrorism unit in their police force. And that is called Detachment 88. Detachment 88 has been incredibly successful. They've disrupted terrorist cells. They've gone after individual terrorists. They've captured equipment. So they've done a really good job with our help through this one elite police detachment. And I think that's clearly something that can be replicated elsewhere. We haven't even done it in all of Southeast Asia, because in the Philippines we actually went ahead and worked with the Philippine military. We used a different model there, and there were good reasons for doing that. But I think we should look at the Indonesian model and maybe try to see what we can apply in the Middle East. But the problem is, of course, we have to strengthen the institutions in the Middle East as well.
There's a lot of work to be done, lots of work to be done. You know, can you believe it, Dr. Farkas? We're out of time.
No way! I was just getting started.
I get the funny feeling it's been only almost 30 minutes already. Dr. Farkas, thank you so much again for being here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Carlin. It was a pleasure.